I think looking at the country currently, the mood swing can be in two folds, like Len mentioned. If you are talking to folks that are living in the provinces, they are pretty much optimistic about the electrification project that Barrow is currently doing in the country. But whilst if you come to the urban center, you know, it's more like a pessimistic, very low mood, coupled with the skyrocketing of food prices during the Ramadan. Yeah, so the mood comes in two folds depending on the geographical location of people in the country, in a nutshell.
Yeah, we can go straight into our topics. We start with the coalition talks. What are your takes on it?
Yeah, the political landscape in the country is so crowded that no single political party can win the upcoming election. This is my, the thinking. But notwithstanding, also, I think the fundamental question we need to ask is more like what kind of governance, these coalitions will produce normally. Like that is the model, basically. Because we have seen the 2016 model coalition government, which many, if you ask many average Gambians, they'll tell you that they don't meet the expectations actually because the promises were left unfulfilled. So these are some of the issues currently facing. So the the ruling government, that is the NPP, also has their own coalition. So now it's left with the fragmented oppositions to come together to also have a unified this thing. But the mode, the modality is now the big question now, because the UDP, that is the majority in terms of opposition and structure-wise and all those stuff, are of the opinion that if any viable coalition is to happen, they need, their political leader needs to serve as the flag bearer. So these are issues normally that I believe the parties can come together, have a candid or frank discussions and forge ahead. But for me, the fundamental thing issue with all this coalition is the modality. That is one, and also what kind of governance they are hoping to produce for the Gambian people.
In the Gambia's institutional setup, would a coalition government be structurally manageable?
Very difficult. So just because one, it's difficult, and I think the 2016 coalition and what happened after that has given us, and probably that is why people are also some people, I should add, very pessimistic about like Dr. Jose. What modalities would you put in place? What governance system are you bringing it? I mean, etc. Because I mean, you look at the current constitution, institutional setup, it does not like legally and constitutionally cater for that. I mean, we are not a parliamentary democracy where you say, okay, if one party pulls out of the coalition, the government collapses. So if we were a parliamentary democracy where, I mean, the government is decided by who has and control the majority in the parliament, etc. If one party that has a huge following or a number of seats in the parliament pulls out, then the government collapses. And when the rule, I mean, whosoever is leading the coalition has that in mind, probably that serves as a mechanism to control that party. But where you don't have that, I mean, it means it becomes just a gentleman agreement like what we had in 2016. So it would depend on the goodwill of who becomes the flag bearer and eventually the winner of any coalition. If the goodwill is there, then that's it. If the goodwill is not there, then at the end of the day, that's it. Except where you have, let's say, unity among the other political parties who are able to say, for example, yeah, we would not pass in the budget in the assembly except the executive does X and X, Y, and Z. But if you don't have that, I mean, very, very difficult to manage.
Malang,
And looking at what happened in 2016,
go on,
trust
Len. Go on,
is,
Len.
yeah, looking at what happened in 2016, trust is an issue within the political parties. Who do you trust? Who would you trust? Would you trust Adam Barrow? Would you trust Hussein Udabo after what he said about the coalition, my party? Would you trust? There are all those trust issues, Muhammad Ba, etc. We saw what Barrow did. Like, immediately, anyone who was trying to challenge his dominance and the dominance of the UDP within the coalition was kicked out. We can name them, going OJ and the others who were saying, well, after 3 years, they would leave the coalition. When Halifa was dismissed as the coalition spokesperson by my party, etc. So yes, I mean, those trust issues are still there. So who would you trust at the end of the day to go into a coalition? That's a huge question that all these opposition parties need to answer first.
Yeah, so to begin with, I'm not a fan of coalition government, and I strongly believe coalition governments are not viable in developing African countries, especially more so developing democracies like our own in the Gambia. Because this thing comes in two folds. Normally, the structure is always problematic because to have a solid, a viable coalition, for sustainable development, you need to have that structural wise. Let us just look at our political party, a small country with a population of about, is it to 1 point something million? So having about 20 something political parties. So the structure itself of the political parties is problematic in itself, talk less of what joining together. So in fact, that is the more reason why UDP is banking on if any viable coalition is going to forge ahead, they are going to take the lead. This statement was not made in out of vacuum, but rather they actually knows that in the country they are the only one that have, in terms of the opposition, they are the only one that have, real structures in place. For coalition government, this is, one of the problems that they have. And again, the 2016 coalition, in the sense that the ultimate objective at that time was just to remove Jammeh. So there is no strategic plan, you know, okay, post Jammeh, what are we going to do? So these are some of the issues. So these are some of the issues that they need to ask themselves normally. So because not only in Gambia, but we have seen that coalition government in other African countries, they tend to fail. Kenya is a clear example. So the structures are not in place, coupled with the leadership also, because many times what happens is that they will obviously before going into coalition sign this MOU, that is the memorandum of understanding. But after the election, you know, the implementation of that document now becomes problematic because it's now going to be more, patronage politics instead of, what the real this thing entails. Even in terms of ministerial distribution and all those stuff, these are issues. So institutional reforms that they touted during the campaign. So most of these promises are left on as a result, it becomes what fragmented, disjointed, just like the one we have in the 2016 coalition that defeated President Jammeh.
That's the structural side of it. From a citizens and development lens, citizens hear coalition and the talks of coalition happening and whether it's going to happen or so. Do they interpret it as a strategy or just a negotiation between elites?
Yeah, I mean, I think the last Afrobarometer, was it the Afrobarometer or CEPRAS, pointed along those lines that citizens really want to see a coalition. Those who don't want to vote for the incumbent think that a coalition is a strategy to get rid of Barrow. So I think people have tested coalition model in 2016. They saw that it worked against the incumbent. So the idea is, yes, if you want to get the current incumbent out also, you need a coalition. There is some sense to that, okay? Look at what they pulled from the last presidential election. So how about if you were to bring all these votes together? Okay, somebody voting for probably Talib, UMC, if he would contest, let me put it that way, yeah? Somebody voting for Dabo. I think the only thing that all the opposition parties agree about is, let's say, their hatred, let me use that word, of the current incumbent. Yeah, I mean, majority of those who want to contest against Barrow, they hate the current regime. That is the only thing they share. But in terms of policy, strategy, some are in fact at zero, like Doctor was saying. What policies do they have in place? What mechanisms do they have in place, etc.? We've seen several individuals in the last month come up to declare their intention to run or to form a political party without really telling the people what difference would they offer. So, yes, I think generally people see it as a strategy to get rid of the incumbent. I think even within the NPP, they understand that, well, this is a strategy, a winning strategy. And I think that is why Barrow is also interested in keeping his current coalition together, because he believes that, well, it adds weight to him to easily cling onto power. So it's a winning strategy. I think that is how people see it. But beyond the winning, in terms of the development opportunities that it would offer, I don't think people really see that optimism in
The one question that everyone has been asking and talking about is who should lead? How should we do it if there is supposed to be a coalition this time? Because in many democracies, the biggest opposition party tend to lead. So do we go with the same for the Gambia, or should we negotiate the leadership differently?
I think it will be prudent if the political parties, that is the opposition, the fragmented oppositions, because the way they are fragmented like this is more like, advantage the incumbent. Because I always say the more political parties we have standing alone, the more they are giving the NPP alliance path to victory, if I can say, a very simple and clear path to victory. So, with regards to the leadership, because like you rightly mentioned, the whole talks of coalition government in the country right now is who, if it's to happen, who will lead? Is it going to be UDP-led coalition, or is it going to be the political parties coming together to at least do a kind of a primary, if you like call it, for leadership? So these are, $1 million questions basically. But looking at the political landscape of the country, with the opinion that a coalition that is led by UDP has more viable options also.
Why is that? Why
The
is that?
problem, yeah, the why is it that? Because one thing is that currently, if you look at all the political parties, including PDOIs, of course, that is have been here for a long time. I believe they have, the structure, they have the base. Politics is all about the base. If you don't have base, you have nothing in politics. So politics is all about these issues. The only problem with the UDP-led coalition is the perception of the public. Perception matters a lot in politics. So this is because the perception drives from a range of issues like they are aggressive. The political base of UDP are aggressive. So these are some of the issues. But notwithstanding, I strongly believe that pro UDP who can give them a more viable option.
Yeah, and, like I mean, I think that's a core challenge today. Who would lead the coalition? And we have several, I mean, positions or debates on that. Like Doctor was just explaining before we lost him. If you look, one argument, and that's the UDP argument, is that they have the base. They are more structured than, if not all, most of the political parties. And that gives them a leverage to lead. And that gives them an opportunity to win. Counter argument to that has been, and that continues to be one of the counter arguments, that, well, if you have the structure, you have the base, why not you subject that to a test? I mean, a fair test, for example, like what they did in 2016, where we all come together and contest. If your candidate wins through that primaries, then we agree that your candidate has led, shown that he's the winnable candidate within these coalition parties. That's the alternative model. But I think generally UDP is not willing to subject itself to that because it sees itself as the majority within the opposition parties. But probably a counter argument to that another counter argument to that could be, yes, you've been the majority, but if you would bring us the same flag bearer who has not been able to win any public office, I mean, that does not make sense to us. So let us give it a new face. And probably this is one of the arguments coming from the UMC as well. Yeah, that, yeah, we need a new face. So those complexities are there. Would UDP be ready again to subject itself to a sort of a primary like we had in 2016? And then what happens? Because, like I said, all these political parties are suffering trust issues. For UDP, it was betrayed by Adama Barrow under a coalition arrangement. Therefore, are they willing to subject themselves to another coalition arrangement where somebody could emerge as the flag bearer, and at the end of the day, if that person becomes the president, they would be betrayed again? So that is something that they have to think about. Whilst on the other side, the political parties would argue that, well, in fact, it was UDP who betrayed the coalition. They filled the coalition with most of their positions. Most of the positions were filled by people either openly or secretly affiliated with the UDP or sympathetic to the UDP. And in the end, they were the first who said that, well, the coalition agreement is not strong or not stronger than, the constitution, or in fact, the agreement was not signed, etc. So they started punching cracks. So people would always say, well, if we go into a coalition with this bigger party as the leadership again, they might repeat what happened in 2016. So it goes back to these trust issues and what mechanisms do you put in place to bridge that gaps. And we can, in fact, look at this from a geopolitical point of view. The reason why, many people, I would say, are cautious with, countries like, let's say, Gambia having closer ties with Senegal or whatsoever, is because Senegal is the bigger one. So there is bound to be trust. Yes, this one is bigger, and therefore he would bully me, he would want to dominate me, etc. So there are those issues that we would see and continue to see in any discussions for a coalition. And probably, maybe there is no need to aim for, let's say, a unified opposition. Maybe we should allow it just to evolve naturally. Parties that feel like they are so much aligned in principle, they can work together in whatsoever way they agree to work together. Let us allow them to work in that way and come up with a coalition and see what would happen. Like Sid Marty would always say, he would say that it's a theory that no party can defeat the incumbent. So let us go to the polls and see whether with different coalitions, based on what is agreed, maybe one of them is able to shake the incumbent. Okay. So parties that are willing to go in with the UDP model of having the UDP to lead with the structures it has, with its base, let them go in with UDP. Other parties that believe that, well, we need, a system built on equity or on equality. We go to a primaries. Whosoever wants to contest from the parties is tested to that primaries, and whosoever emerges becomes the winner of what some are already calling a united front, like we've seen in the past. Let them bring that model, and we see. It would be interesting to see. Now, the reason why I said maybe we don't need all political parties to unite under one umbrella, I think that's with the current landscape, that seems to be impossible. But some people would say, never say never in politics. But
In
again, just
politics,
look
yeah.
at it this way. In 2016, all the political parties were not united.
The situations are very different because back then we were trying to get rid of someone who has already terrorized us. But this time we have a president who is very development oriented. So if we want to get rid of him, I believe it has to be a grand chorus.
I have a slightly different, opinion with Len, because for me, this is my take though, because anywhere in the world, coalition governments are based on certain things: leadership, number, and compromise. Coalition governments are based on these issues. So, notwithstanding, I strongly believe UDP, they are more capable. These are some of the issues that comes to play. But just to come back to the coalition question, yeah, honestly, I totally disagree. UDP, like I mentioned, they already have the numbers. The numbers are already there. They have the base. The base that they have, no other opposition, you give any candidate to UDP, any candidate is a sellable candidate because the fan base is massive. Let's look at a clear example is Talib. Talib came along with, Papanjai. In fact, many people were of the opinion Papanjai is going to win even the primary then. Talib came from nowhere. Honestly, what base Talib has then at that time? So for UDP, I think it is not an issue of, whether you have you are in touch with the grassroots, it is all about what the marketability, basically. Because UDP already has the numbers. That's why I say, for me, any coalition without UDP is bound to fail. Any coalition government without them, they cannot make it. But again, we also need to give that fair share to other political parties also, because there need to be that transparent primary, in the fairest way moving forward.
Well, just to emphasize the points that we've been making, I think is very much complex. Honestly, like Malang is very right. Right, there is a loyal base for the US. I mean, for the UDP rather. No matter what, there are those people who are going to vote UDP. Okay, but now there are people who already left the UDP because they did not get the flag bearer position. Talib, Lamin J. Dabo, they all left because they did not get the flag bearer position. Now, how do you bring those people back to the UDP to rally behind the current flag bearer? For me, that seems impossible. And that is why I am saying the way things look like now, I think it's safe to conclude that we would not have a grand or a single coalition from the opposition parties. Maybe let's expect two, a minimum of two different camps in the opposition. Because the reason why UDP would leave Talib to go and leave Lamin Dabo to go is just the leadership. It's not about policy, it's not about anything. It's just the leadership. The entire contest is based on the leadership. There would be a UDP-led coalition and there would be another coalition. For now, I think maybe out of 100, maybe best chance would be 40 out of 100. And maybe I am being very,
40,
very
40
generous.
from you're very charitable. 40 from
Yeah,
you're
right.
very
I'm being
charitable.
very generous, right? Right. Yeah. So, like there are people who don't want to rally behind Dabo. Like Malang is suggesting, we have a UDP led because of everything. But UDP is not also willing to sacrifice Dabo's leadership for any other party, even within those who are in the party. So party does, there is still a possibility within these other fragments.
Concern is for them having the numbers, being the largest opposition party in the Gambia, and they have been consistently, contesting elections, coming out second all the time with their numbers and structures. Why would they want to go into, let's say, a primary?
Now, yeah, but you haven't signed. Now, this is the point. If you look at that base that we are talking about, going back as what 97, that base has been reducing, right? So look at how many people have left the UDP to add on the other bases. The APRC base, Rambo Jata, and when he left the, etc. I need not be NPP. Like, these are not just people like I and Malang who have no followership, okay? Them go by force from the UDP, okay, to NPP, be Talib, to UMC. That itself shows us score UDP la base ning abe reduced from 1996 to date. I understand UDP la counter argument is that, well, there has not been any fair election also. Yes, you have the base people who are within the party and loyal to the party and the party leadership. But the essence, the way to win is to convince others. And that is not what has been happening. It is now base membeje for 28% them bank for 29% them, for 32% them, for 37% them. I think that was their best, right? Around 37% or so. Okay. How do you bring the others to add on that number? Because without that, it looks like it is a win no. Last election, NPP la percentage, compare that to UDP, okay? So what UDP needs to do is to convince other parties or people who have voted for other parties or candidates to join them. So if you cannot do that, then you cannot win. And maybe that is why it makes sense for people to say, okay, let us go to primary. Then if you can convince the other parties to vote for your leadership, then we choose you. There is some sense to that. Yes. I mean, the other argument is no, we already have a large number. It's easier to bring the additional number that we need just to win than to convince our large majority to come and join your party. Yes, that also, all these positions are valid in their own ways. But what I'm saying is if UDP is having these numbers, those numbers have been reducing from 1996 by the records. Those are the records. Where are the records? We can contest the records and say, well, the elections were not free and fair, etc. here and there. I mean, that's a different argument. But the point is, what the record shows is that UDP fongola base betalakanne. And even if you don't believe in numbers, I mean, look, these observations that we've made here. Mojel, Barabal, Fongomuni Alonko, they are pillars. UDP Muni Alonko, they were big wigs. It are NPP, wala it are UMC, etc. So what should you do to convince those people to come back? That is the biggest challenge that the UDP is facing, and it would face.